Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome. I'm looking at all of the people who have been joining us in the room. It looks like we have a pretty good crowd today, so I'm excited. So today's panel is focusing on teaching for racial justice. As Julie mentioned, this is sort of the beginning of a conversation rather than just a one-off. We do it for an hour. What we're going to bring up today, I'm sure will be an entryway into a number of different conversations about teaching philosophies and practices that cultivate racial justice in the classroom. This looks like, I want to say here at Hunter College, even home, but you know what I mean. Hunter College at large, in person and remote. So what's going to happen today is there are three of us who are going to share for a quick 10 minutes just to get started. Our entryway today is through ethnic studies in particular. That is not the only way to talk about issues of racial justice, but that is the pathway that we're using today. I will be going first and talking about thinking about teaching for racial justice from a Latina, Latino, or some of you may are hearing the Latinx perspective. And I am an associate professor in the Department of Africana and Puerto Rican / Latino Studies at Hunter. I'm also an Assert Fellow this year, as Julie mentioned. After that, my colleague, Roberta Kilkenny, who has been a longtime adjunct in our department, as I am in Africana and Puerto Rican / Latino Studies, will present and talk about her experiences teaching in the Africana Studies sequence. And last but not least, we are joined by Vivian Louie, who is a professor in urban planning and policy, and also the director of the Asian American Studies Center and Program. So I will go ahead. I'm going to go ahead and share my slides right now. And I'm sort of multitasking also by timing myself. So bear with me here. Okay, let's see. Okay, you should be seeing my PowerPoints. Okay, I love the thumbs up. Thank you, Julie. And let me just press start for the timer. Okay, so as I mentioned, I'm talking about this through a Latina, Latino, Latinx studies approach. I will be honest, we could probably have a whole presentation on the difference between just terminology, right? What is the difference between Hispanic and Latina, Latino, Latinx? The field itself is having a big debate about what to call itself. And so I'll leave that for question answers, but I've left the A/O/X just to represent the various ways that this might be referred to across the country in different programs. When I am, just to be clear, when I'm talking about Latinas, Latinos, I am talking about people of Latin American descent who are living in the US. And that, as you can imagine, is a pretty heterogeneous group. So I've put up just this map of Latin America just to remind us, right, of the many countries that people come from, and there are different colonial histories there. There are different, waves of migration, push and pull factors in terms of migration, linguistic practices, right? In terms of how, for example, Spanish is spoken. There are places too that don't speak Spanish, that speak Portuguese or English. And also a number of indigenous languages that, like, for example, in Mexico, there are over 60 indigenous languages that are still spoken. So I bring that up because I think that in the US context, Latinos tend to be very much flattened, culturally, linguistically, racially, as I'll talk about in a bit. But you're really talking about a very, very diverse group. As a matter of fact, I often take offense when people sort of suggest that people who do Latino studies do me search, because oftentimes I feel like I'm not studying people who quite have the same experience as I do, culturally, in terms of generation. So I bring that up because it is, one of the first things that you sort of have to engage with is this idea that there is heterogeneity there. And so sometimes there are tensions, right? In terms of thinking about how these different groups, relate to one another, particularly in our context of New York City, right, which is already a very diverse city. in and of itself. And the Latino community has diversified quite a bit in the last 40 years within the city and its suburbs. I also want to mention, just really briefly, it's important to keep in mind too that at Hunter, we are what is designated as a Hispanic serving institution. A Hispanic serving institution is any institution that has more than a fourth, right? So more than 25% of its student population identifying as Hispanic or Latino. We are close to around 30%. Most recent numbers are for the incoming class this fall. But I bring this up because even for those of you who may not teach Latino-centered courses, I think that these are things to keep in mind as you approach your students in your classroom, regardless of the discipline. A quick word on Latino studies and its development. That in and of itself could be a whole presentation. But for those of you who are not so familiar, Latino studies does have its roots, in the civil rights movement, and in particular, it stems from the Chicano the Chicano movement out on the West Coast, in the Southwest, right, which was a very Mexican-centered civil rights movement, and also thinking about us on the East Coast, movements among Puerto Rican communities here. In particular here at Hunter, we have a very, very rich history. In particular, in my department. 1969 was the year that the department was founded, and that was led by students, coalition between Black and Puerto Rican students pushing for wanting the curriculum to include these really important historical omissions, right, in terms of thinking about humanities and social sciences. So I bring that up because I think it's really important to remember those roots. We are in a current moment, where ethnic studies is sort of trending across the country. So for example, enrollments are up all over the country in terms of ethnic studies, but it's important, I think, to remember that we have a long history here and our departments have done really innovative work in terms of thinking of things that we take for granted now. For example, like experiential learning or service learning, right? These departments were developed very much to not only speak to the student population, but the larger, local community, and really kind of key in on what was going on, in that particular city or place, right, where the department was housed. So just a few key points in terms of thinking about, censoring Latina-OX experiences in the classroom and what a Latino studies perspective can offer. I put three, really big concepts here that you could explore, and there are many more. But one of those, for example, is like the idea of racialization. And so I'll talk about this a little bit more in a moment, but in the US context, we often, sort of common sense perceptions are that Latinos are a race, but they are not. It's really, and I'll come down here for a second. It's really a pan-ethnic label, right? That includes a number of different ethnicities. And within those, right, this is multiracial, right? So someone, I think, could look like myself, for example, and have, whatever that mestiza, what we might say is mestiza, right? Kind of mixed look, but on the lighter side, you have people who, identify as Black or Afro-Latino. The Afro-Latino movement has gained quite a bit of traction in the last 10 years in terms of giving some more exposure to that, right? And thinking about how Latinos might look on a range. You also have I have an image here of some of you might recognize Yalitza Aparicio, an actress in the award-winning film Roma, who's of indigenous descent from Mexico. And I bring her up just because I think, oftentimes people do not think of Latinos as indigenous, but I want to emphasize that in New York City in the last 20 years, we've had a growth in Latin American immigrants and their children who come to the city, and Spanish is not their first language, it's an indigenous language, right? And they have an indigenous identity. And that's, I think, very different from the ways that we tend to think about Latinos. And so I'm trying to disrupt that a little bit so you can kind of get a sense of that heterogeneity. But that said, with racialization, I say racialization here because even though Latinos are not a race, they are viewed as a race. And so, and with that, right, there are all sorts of ways in which they're constructed racially, right? And we are in a moment, for example, if you think about Latinos, Latino immigrants and the ways in which they're racialized, right? As different, as illegal, as new immigrants, right? And particularly in the case of Mexicans, that's really problematic because we know in the Southwest, you have folks who've been there for generations and generations. And there's a much longer history there in terms of manifest destiny and Mexico becoming part of the US. So that's one of the ways to think about that, and Latinos really disrupt that. Ways of thinking about race in that way and get us to really think about that critically. Another way to think about this is, in terms of xenophobia, right? And that's, I think, just so important right now. Not only just what's happening outside of the classroom, but to remember too that many of our students are immigrants or children of immigrants, whether they're Latino or not. And this is like one way that you could kind of enter into that conversation and think about xenophobia in the contemporary, think about it long-term, historically, right, and what that's looked like in the US and other contexts. Also colonialism, right? Like when you talk about Latinos, you're talking about multiple different kinds of colonialism, depending on ethnicity. For example, in the Puerto Rican context, Puerto Rico was a colony of Spain and then of the US. And so, there are different ways that you could talk about, right, these different kinds of colonial contexts. There's also a really strong history here of Latina feminisms, which offer intersectional approaches that are very much in conversation, for example, with Black feminisms, certainly coming from different perspectives, but I bring that up because they really push us, to really think about our work in terms of not only race and ethnicity, but thinking about gender, sexuality, disability. And so that's another, and the field is ripe with scholarship in that area. And also thinking about these questions of citizenship, right? Legal, of course, I always refer to as material, but also things like second-class citizenship. So even if you are a US citizen, right, not being treated as one, right? And that's been the case, for example, with Puerto Ricans, certainly with African Americans. And then thinking about cultural citizenship, which, right, thinking about ways that people contribute, even if they may not have, even whether they have legal citizenship or not. So I have like a minute left. So just in terms, really quickly, in terms of classroom practices, one of the things I do is, try to decouple race and ethnicity for students. I think this is really important, given the context of New York City, where you have like a lot of white ethnic students as well. It's important that they know that those are different things, right? Thinking about, like I always give an example, think of American, in terms of race, they might identify as Black, but in terms of ethnicity, they would say they're Haitian. So we talk quite a bit about that. My background is I'm trained as a media studies scholar. Coming into ethnic studies, most of us come through a discipline. Sometimes we're lucky enough to be trained and have a PhD in ethnic studies. There are, there are programs out there, but most of us tend to come through a discipline. So I'm trained in communication and media studies. So I do a lot of analyzing images with students. So for example, we might take, a cover like this, right? This is from Bloomberg Business Week from a few years ago. And here I asked them to sort of sit with the image. We look at it in terms of what's happening here visually. If there was sound with this piece, we would listen to the sound too, to think about dialogue, music, sound effects, and then thinking about like, what is the larger narrative here? And I think this is really important because that's a skill that the students take with them outside of the classroom, right? As they navigate world. So I will stop there. I run out of time. I put up a few resources here. Jillian and the rest of our CERT folks, I'll give links, I'll offer links for these so that we can share them afterward. But these are, some of the resources here. The first one, Teaching for Diversity and Social Justice, is an older anthology, but it's one that quite a lot of people use, and it has a lot of activities. So if you're looking for really practical things to do in the classroom, that's a great resource. I have something here from the University of Michigan that they've developed that has like tons and tons of links on it. The Equality Archive, which has really accessible short pieces for students to read. And CFDD, which our CERT just did a workshop on last week, focused on research, but I also want to emphasize they have teaching webinars as well. And many of them are focused on issues of racial justice. And lastly, I just want to emphasize what's happening at CUNY. At CUNY, in terms of Latino studies, we are very lucky to house 3 different research centers: the Centro, the Center for Puerto Rican Studies, which is at Hunter College, the Dominican Institute up at City College, and the Mexican Studies Institute, which is housed at Lehman. So I will stop here. But again, I'll share these resources so that everybody has the links later. So thanks so much. And I'm going to invite Roberta to share now. I'll stop sharing.
Okay, thank you, Jillian, and greetings to everyone. I'm just gonna set up my share screen, which I've never really liked how Zoom does this, but let me see. You are sharing. I know there's a way, can you see the slide? Because
Yes.
Yes,
the way Zoom does this, I can't see what you're seeing anymore. But everyone has experienced this. Okay. So several of you know me already because I've been involved with so many of the ASSERT and other ICIT programs. But for those of you who don't know me, I'm Roberta Walker Kilkenny. I've been an adjunct in Africana and Puerto Rican Latino studies since January of 2001. But my history with the department actually goes back a lot further. In the 1960s, I was the head of Black Society, which was the Black student organization at Hunter College High School. So I was involved in the student demonstrations on the campus in the 60s that led to the formation of what was then called the Black and Puerto Rican Studies Department, and also led to the formation of the Faculty Senate in 1970. I wanted to refer briefly to a New York Times headline that appeared in March 1969 that referred to us high school students as revolutionaries who have to be home by 7:30. And in the article, it referred to a student underground publication that was being put out at the time and how we got permission to use an IBM computerized typesetter by people at the New York Free Press. And quoting one of the leaders from the Free Press, he said, "We taught them to use the IBM typesetter in one day. According to IBM, adults take 2 weeks to learn." So I kind of like that because it was clear that computers would become a tool in various liberation struggles. And they were talking about that already in the late 60s. My courses at Hunter have made use of computer technology in one form or another since I started in 2001. I've taught hybrid courses since at least 2006, if not earlier, and fully online courses since 2012. And I tend to speak quickly, so if the interpreter could just let me know if I'm going too fast or if I'm okay. Okay, thank you.
You're good.
So, thank you. My emphasis is going to be a little different from Jillian's. I'm going to talk about the potential of the digital age for communities of African descent, and then some of the ways in which I try to address what's been called the digital divide, and talk a little bit about how I create my learning materials, and also a course that has been taught experimentally for the last few years and is now going hopefully through the last step of the regularization process and will become part of our catalog. I wanted to mention that the department students come from a wide variety of ethnic backgrounds, and some of what I'm going to say has applicability no matter what the ethnic origins are of the students. But the case studies that I've used through the years have been case studies that are specific to the Africana experience. So first I want to talk about the potentials and some of the challenges, and refer first to my personal inspirations. The first one, I really have to give credit to my father. He never gave me dolls and stuffed animals. He gave me erector sets and model radios to build. And at 11, that's the earliest I remember using a computer. It was on the campus of Teachers College, Columbia University. And the computer took up the entire room and basically has the same computing power that our smartphones have now. So we've come a long way. The other inspiration I had and still have is Abdul Al-Kalimat. Abdul is now Professor Emeritus at the Department of African American Studies and also in the School of Information Sciences at the University of Illinois. He was involved in the civil rights, Black Power, and anti-apartheid movements, and also in the birth and continuation of the Black Studies movement starting in the 1960s. He developed one of the earliest courses in the field of what he would call e-Black studies in 1996, when he was head of the Africana Studies program at the University of Toledo. And he talked about what he called 3 principles of e-Black studies. The first one being cyber democracy, where he said that e-Black depends on everyone having access to and becoming an active user of computers, information technology, and virtual reality. The second principle was collective intelligence, where intellectual production is organized around community, collaborative efforts, and so forth. And the third thing he talked about was information freedom, meaning that everyone would have access to the product of that intellectual activity. And he's very much an activist scholar. He always has combined his community and communal political action with his scholarship. The other inspiration is Brian Carter. Brian is now an associate professor at the University of Arizona. And he specializes in African American literature, especially focused on the Harlem Renaissance. And he is a scholar committed to social justice, but he's not an activist scholar. He expresses his commitment through his scholarship. And one of the things he did during his dissertation for his PhD in the 1990s was to develop a virtual environment that he called Virtual Harlem. And it was in what was called a cave, which is a computer automatic virtual environment. And you literally go into a room and you're surrounded on all of the walls by Virtual Harlem. You can interact with other people in the room as well as with the virtual design. So these were the 2 people who gave me, on a personal level, inspiration. My concerns with respect to my students in the department arose because I was originally hired to teach evening courses, and there were some immediate challenges, including the fact that the library was often closed when the evening students could go to the library. Many students were only on campus long enough to attend class, so they didn't participate in other kinds of social activities. Some of the students, and this was especially true of the nursing students in my class, they didn't have consistent work schedules, so they may work a night shift one month and a day shift the next month, and you can imagine the impact that would have on their ability to attend physically. So I came increasingly to believe that remote learning, especially asynchronous learning, could address several of these challenges. So then what are some of the major challenges that we have to meet? And for me, and this was especially true last year, I needed to get to know my students. And right now I'm focusing on, from an educational technology perspective, there are other ways, of course, that you would also want to know your students. And these are some of the questions that I was particularly concerned with in March of last year, keeping in mind that the course was already fully online even before the pandemic began, but these were questions that arose afresh, right? Do they have the technology that they need now that the campus is closing down, especially? Where will they do their coursework? Where are they located? And I wanted to know what suggestions they had. So I sent out a survey. I used Qualtrics. Of course, many of you could use SurveyMonkey to do something similar. Qualtrics just has more features. And I asked them the questions that you see on the screen, including how, are you concerned with how you can manage stress? So they weren't just questions about technology, but also other things that might impact on them given the pandemic, right? And how can, what are the issues that they're concerned with? And there was also other, and one student said, she was concerned about how disability services would function with the campus closed, deadlines for assignments, and so on. And students also told me what technology they required. It was interesting because half of them, almost half, said that they have all of the essential resources they need. Now, I sent this out in March. By April, some of these same students said they don't have what they needed. So they had difficulty anticipating what it really meant for the campus to be closed. As you can see, a quarter of the students said they don't have printers at home, and so on. Most seem to have a computer and didn't have a need for a computer. That's what they said. But I think we've all seen students do homework assignments using their smartphones. So I suspect some of the students who said they had computers, access to computers, were forgetting that they couldn't use the PC labs on campus when we shut down. And we're thinking of their smartphones as a substitute. This is kind of based on something that we've seen a lot at assert gatherings, where the assert people give us different images and say, which one do you feel like? It's good for conversations as a conversation starter, and is another way of finding out how your students are doing. I think most of my students would fall under A, C, D, or F. A, they don't have Wi-Fi at home, so they've gone to McDonald's. Notice the cartoon does not say Starbucks to use the Wi-Fi. The student in C doesn't have a computer, so he's listening via tin can. Some students do have laptops, but many, as in D, but many, like in F, use their smartphones in lieu of a desktop or a laptop computer. So once you know that, it's then, as the faculty member, once you know that, you have to figure out, well, what kinds of instructional materials are you going to provide when you have students with these various needs? And I came across this matrix, which I really like, because it's based on how you teach, what you use, given different bandwidth situations, so you can see Zoom is there somewhere. Okay, upper right-hand corner, Zoom for office hours, high bandwidth, right? Synchronous tool.
Roberta, I'm so sorry. The 10 minutes is up, so go ahead and finish up.
Okay. Let me just say quickly, one of the things I have done. Okay, I use Adobe Captivate. I don't reinvent the wheel. There's a lot of tutorials that are available from third parties or from Hunter CUNY on how to use Blackboard, but I have created an interactive tutorial that's specific to Blackboard as I use it. So my students can use the tutorial. It tells them, to get to assignments, you click on assignments. If they click in the wrong place, it tells them, no, that's the wrong place, etc. But the other thing I've done, I'll skip over that particular transcript. I also make those workshops downloadable in handouts that I give to the students, so that if they have to work online or if they can only open up Blackboard but not the automated tutorial, they have handouts which show them the screen images as well as the instructions. So the handouts take the pages from the automated tutorial and make it available. If I can just steal another minute. The other thing I wanted to show was how I've dealt in the past with guest lecturers who've been on campus. I've recorded them using Adobe Connect, and then afterwards the recording is available. And the reason I prefer Connect to Zoom is because Connect retains all of the interactivity that may have been there. If there was a poll, downloadable files, etc., are there. And then at the very end of the day, I want to ask, what does liberation look like within our situation at Hunter? Somewhere between equality and equity. Equality, I think of the PC labs, equity, the loaner programs. But some of those things are fading away. The loaner programs, if you need for the spring semester, you can't apply until December. It still says laptop / iPad / Chromebook. Many of you know Chromebook has a lot of issues when it comes to compatibility. The free Wi-Fi services are no longer available, and so forth. So how do we get to a liberation situation, which personally I think hinges on free Wi-Fi, PCs for all students, not just the Macaulay student laptop program, but for all of the students at Hunter, the free laptops and things like that. A lot of these programs probably would require local government or federal funding and will not come from Hunter or CUNY. But I think we need to start to think about, how do we make things available on a permanent basis, not just for a crisis. Then I will leave it at that. I will put the links to the things I mentioned in the chat. And this is my contact information in case anyone wants to write after the session is over. Thank you, and thank you for the additional time. I'm not in the Cuban Women's Federation. I don't stop in the middle of a sentence.
Thanks, Roberta. Vivian, whenever you're ready.
So I've stopped sharing. Vivian can go ahead.
Thanks so much. Thanks, Roberta. Hope it's okay if we just use first names for a small group. Many thanks to Jillian and to Julie and to CERT for the invitation. And I'm excited to join Jillian and Roberta here today. Let me know if you have any issues. If you hear me, you can just reach out to me. But I'm just going to move forward. So I'm a professor in urban policy and planning, and I direct the Asian American Studies Program and Center here at Hunter. Hunter has the largest Asian American Studies undergraduate program within CUNY. In fall 2020 through summer of 2021, 1,100 students took our courses here. So what is Asian American Studies and what is its relationship to social justice? So Asian American Studies is grounded in the idea that to understand America, we need to understand the experiences and contributions of Asian Americans, of all its peoples. And that working together is needed to build the common good, to build America, to move us forward. So some of the questions that we really ask in all our courses is who counts as an American, under what conditions, and how can Americans build coalitions with one another to fight for equality for all? So all of our courses in Asian American Studies here at Hunter, we have 20 sections on deck for spring 2022. They help us pose and think through and answer these key questions. And I'll share a slide at the end that I'll have a link and you can actually see some of our courses. They're really terrific. They're co-listed with some of the departments and the good folks here in the audience. But answering these kinds of questions has anchored my own kind of professional and research career and also my teaching. So I'm trained as a sociologist. I previously worked as a newspaper journalist and an editor, summer workshop teacher for a youth publication, as a program officer for a national foundation that funds social science research. So doing this kind of social justice work across disciplines and domains has been a key feature of who I am and what I do. I first taught Asian American Studies at Harvard, and this is because that's where I spent the first part of my academic career in sociology, and then at the Harvard Graduate School of Education, where I also taught immigration, education, and identities, a course, as you might imagine, with a great deal of ethnic studies and social justice content. At Hunter, I've taught Asian 210, Asians in the US, undergraduate course in immigrant and immigration policies. That's again, as you might imagine, with a great deal of ethnic studies content. My remarks today are going to focus on content, context and content, why we need the teaching of social justice, why we need ethnic studies, what it looks like in Asian American studies in undergraduate classes, but also, if I have time, in student support and in public programming. And I'll speak a little bit about specific pedagogical practices, but I can talk about that in the Q&A. So just some context setting. Jillian already mentioned this, but this is a really critical moment for ethnic studies, for curriculum. I'm just going to speak briefly about K through 12, actually. In the wake of the killing of George Floyd, the resurgence of anti-Asian hate, the ongoing burdens of the pandemic, we really are at a critical moment. Last Friday, on October 9th, California required its K through 12 students to learn about the contributions and struggles of Blacks, Latinos, Native Americans, and Asian Americans in our nation's history. Last year, Connecticut became the first state to require high schools to offer Black and Latino studies. New Jersey passed a law last year requiring public schools to offer courses on diversity and inclusion. As for Asian American studies, Illinois recently became the first state to require its K through 12 schools to teach it. In our state of New York, Senators John Liu and Kevin Thomas, the first Asian Americans elected to the New York State Senate. This was back in 2018, a fact that still amazes me. But Senators John Liu and Kevin Thomas, along with several of their colleagues, introduced a bill that would require all New York State public elementary and high schools to teach the historical and civic impact of Asian Americans. Assembly members Ron Kim and Yulin Liu, among others, have lent their support to the bill. There's also a grassroots call to the DOE in New York City to have Asian American history and culture taught in our New York City public schools. This is all really important because, of course, it intersects with the curriculum that we offer in higher education, right? And I'm going to speak specifically about Asian American Studies at Hunter, where we do teach about Manifest Destiny, what Jillian referenced earlier, Jim Crow, civil rights, how can you not, the Trail of Tears. But it would be really helpful if students remembered the exposure they got in K through 12 education and or got more exposure to those important and pivotal moments in our history. So why is ethnic studies important? What do we teach? Well, students learn how to distinguish what are facts and what are opinions. Students learn how to do critical analysis. They learn to understand why these themes about purported Black and Latino deficiency, purported Asian American foreignness keep reappearing in American life. They learn why anti-Semitism in the United States is at an all-time high right now. They learn about how members of these groups have pushed back against the deprivation of their rights. They learn a historical lens to understand what's going on, how to make sense of it, how they can be agents of change. Asian American Studies brings into the story the long and long overlooked history of Asian American Pacific Islander activism against exclusion, especially through our legal system. They learn about how Asian Americans have been at the forefront of landmark policies and Supreme Court rulings around birthright citizenship, around the right of English language learners to supplemental language instruction in public schools, around rescinding naturalized citizenship on the basis of race, pushback against the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II, against the racialized and religious profiling of Arabs, Muslim Americans, Sikhs, and South Asian Americans mistaken for being Muslim after 9/11 in the wake of the 2017 travel ban. They learn about how Asian Americans and Pacific Islanders have pushed for the DREAM Act. Students also learn how change happens. You know, I often share a fact that I learned from the Asian American Studies at Hunter College Oral History Project, which is a fantastic student community research partnership that I've been co-leading since I've been here. And so I learned that between the years of 1974 to 1984, Doctors John Henrik Clark, the founding chair of what is now the Africana, Puerto Rican, and Latino Studies Department, and Tilden Lamel, who was also chair of the same department, and then became Hunter's provost, vice president of academic affairs, and later acting president at Hunter, that they both lent critical support to have some Asian American Studies content taught at Hunter, back when it was only a single course sponsored through their department, through their dollars. But that was incredible. That was a victory back then. So that the origins of Asian American Studies at Hunter College and at CUNY speaks to racial and ethnic coalition building, which we need more than ever today. Students learn about how change happens from a bidirectional perspective. They learn from guest speakers, this has already been mentioned as well, of course, who come into the classroom to share their insights. And they learn about it by going out into the world beyond the classroom to volunteer for community-based nonprofits. They learn about it from our adjunct faculty in Asian American Studies who are so terrific, who are civil rights leaders, activists, leading and emerging artists, but who are also activists in their work. I also wanted to say that student supports are a big part of the story. A third of Hunter's undergraduate students are Asian American. Hunter is an Asian American, Native American, Pacific Islander serving institution, or an ANAPISI for short. The federally supported HCAP program at Hunter College offers extensive student services and supports. Paul McFerrin, who used to lead a CERT, is the co-PI for HCAP. I know Caitlin Hose, the program director, she spoke here before. And I think Marcia Lee, who's in the audience today, also has, and I'm sure John Shin has. John Shin's the PI of a CERT. Anyway, as director of Asian American Studies, I'm really grateful to have HCAP as a partner. And then the last thing I want to say is that, of course, research and public programming are part of this necessary education. So Hunter's Asian American Studies Center, which was launched in 2019, builds on the foundation of our long-time undergraduate program, which had been launched in 1993 to offer public cultural, community, policy, academic programming to further student opportunities. And in the slide that I'll share at the end, you'll see that, for example, Professor Margaret Chin, a faculty associate in Asian American Studies for a really long time, had 2 book panel discussions around why Asian Americans don't reach the top of the corporate ladder, one with corporate leaders, another with researchers. Asian American Studies had an event on anti-Asian hate, co-presented with the Roosevelt House Public Policy Institute here at Hunter. Next week, Hunter and Asian American Studies will have another event, Arts and Activism, co-sponsored again with the department some of y'all are leading here, Reflections from Curtis Chin, an award-winning writer and documentary filmmaker and acclaimed novelist, Bino Rayuro. And both are 2 co-founders of the Asian American Writers Workshop. This is on October 20th at 5 p.m. Eastern. It's an online event. I just want to share that at every point in our educational pipeline, PK through 20, students need our guidance and our advocacy around social justice and ethnic studies more so today than ever before. And that our broader publics who have completed their formal education also need this kind of knowledge building. And I look forward to further discussion of how we can do the work to be there for them. I'm just going to quickly share this one last screen so that you can see it and you will get it, but you can see some of the, I also wanted to thank Kelly Anderson, Chair of Film and Media Studies. She has this terrific set of resources around equity and inclusion and teaching along those lines. For those of you who don't know, there was also a terrific TV show on CUNY TV, Asian American Life, which has amazing segments that might help you if you want to have some sort of content around Asian American studies in your classes. Thank you so much.